She was his mother. She gave him everything, from bike rides to bailouts. And now he sat in court, trying to take her house with a forged signature and a smug wife. Marilyn didn't raise a thief, but Greg became one anyway. She pressed play on the recorder, his voice, laughing about her death. Then she stood, calm as steel, and said, "This is how a mother survives her own betrayal. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from." The air smelled like damp grass and carnations, the kind of scent that wraps around grief without asking. Marilyn stood beneath the gray canopy, clutching the edge of her coat tighter around her ribs. The wind stirred faintly against her veil. Her husband's casket, mahogany, polished, brutally final, rested 6 feet from her toes. She didn't cry. Not yet. Grief wasn't sharp today. It was a slow crush, like the weight of dirt before it's even shoveled. Then came the shove. Not hard, just entitled. Kelsey breezed past her in 4-inch heels, camera phone already raised like a wand, lips pursed in concentration. The black of her outfit was tight, tailored, more runway than mourning. She didn't say "excuse me." She didn't even make eye contact. Marilyn blinked. She turned slightly, thinking maybe she'd misunderstood. But no. There Kelsey stood, angling herself beside the casket like it was a backdrop. She tilted her head, tucked her hair behind one ear, lifted her chin. A soft click, then another. Marilyn's throat tightened. Behind them, Greg stood like a prop, hands folded, eyes trained on the ground, pretending not to see his wife, framing grief for engagement metrics. He said nothing. Of course he didn't. The preacher cleared his throat and began the final words. Marilyn tried to listen, but all she could hear was the subtle shudder of Kelsey's phone catching candids. It was surreal, watching her husband's final goodbye become a filtered moment. Marilyn lowered her gaze to her hands. They were shaking slightly. She tucked them into her sleeves. The wind shifted again, cooler this time, and she stepped closer to the casket. Inside her purse was the watch. His watch. Worn smooth on the leather strap, the face scratched from years of daily wear. He had taken it off the night before his final hospital trip, placed it gently in the ceramic dish on the dresser. She had retrieved it after the call, after the silence. Now she held it inside her coat pocket like a talisman. Her fingers brushed the back where he had engraved it. M to H, year 41. Keep ticking. Marilyn clenched her fist around it. Hard. The final prayer ended. Dirt hit the lid in the first mechanical thud, and the crowd shifted. People hugged, whispered, scattered. Greg stepped forward but not toward her. He drifted behind Kelsey, who was now swiping through her gallery of funeral photos like she was curating a blog post. "Do you mind getting one of us here?" Kelsey asked a woman nearby, handing over her phone with a grateful smile. Marilyn turned away before she saw the pose. Her eyes scanned the sky, then the trees, then the nothingness that suddenly felt louder than the pastor's voice had ever been. Her chest ached, not from loss alone, but from being displaced inside it. Greg didn't approach her, didn't ask how she was. No one did. As the last of the mourners left, Marilyn stood alone near the edge of the lot. The headstone hadn't arrived yet. There was only the disturbed dirt, a few scattered petals, and the faint trace of Kelsey's perfume. She took one step closer to the grave, slipped the watch from her pocket and pressed it against her lips. "I'm still here," she whispered. Then she turned and walked toward the car, her heels crunching on the gravel. Behind her, Kelsey was already uploading a photo. The caption would probably say something like, "Beautiful light for a hard goodbye," maybe a dove emoji, maybe none. What it wouldn't say was this, that she had shoved a 72-year-old widow out of the way, that her husband had watched, and that the woman she shoved was about to remember exactly whose name was still on the deed. The first thing Marilyn noticed was the rug. It was gone. The braided wool runner she and Harold had bought on their 35th anniversary, a muted forest green with a cream border, replaced by something white, geometric, and jarringly sterile. Like someone had photoshopped her entryway. The second thing was the scent. Not lilies, not lemon polish, vanilla oat milk and pink sea salt candles, according to the tag on the coffee table. Marilyn stepped over the threshold of her own house as if she were a guest. Voices drifted from the dining room, too loud, too light. Laughter that didn't match the occasion. Plates clinked. Someone mentioned followers. She paused, fingers brushing the wall where Harold's framed navy photo had always hung. It wasn't there. Instead, a minimalist print read, "Breathe. Align. Transform." Her mouth went dry. She moved down the hallway like she was balancing on ice, eyes scanning for familiarity. None came. In the kitchen, avocado toast slices were stacked in photogenic triangles on white platters. A glass dispenser of cucumber water stood where the kettle used to live. And at the head of the dining table, in a sleeveless black jumpsuit and hoop earrings the size of bracelets, sat Kelsey, smiling, scrolling, comfortable. Greg sat 2 seats down, hunched slightly, focused on a plate of beet salad he didn't seem to be tasting. There were 10 chairs, none for Marilyn. She cleared her throat gently. Heads turned, just a few. Someone smiled politely and went back to chewing. Greg looked up, startled, like he hadn't expected her to show up in her own home. "Oh, Mom," he said, "we thought you'd still be at the cemetery." "I was," she replied evenly. "Then I remembered where I live." Kelsey didn't look up. She just took a bite of her toast and murmured, "We freshened things up a bit. Hope that's okay." Marilyn stared at the wall behind her. Her wedding china, boxed and labeled in the garage, had been replaced by matte black ceramic bowls stacked on floating shelves. "Greg," she said, "where is the rug?" He gave a half laugh, sheepish. "Kels thought it felt a little dated. We wanted to create a more modern, open vibe." For the brand, Marilyn blinked. "The what?" Kelsey finally looked up, eyes bright with the kind of energy that came from attention, not affection. "I've been documenting everything. The journey of grief, healing, and home. Our followers are loving the story arc." "Our?" Marilyn asked quietly. "Well," Greg chimed in, "we just thought, with you gone so much lately, you wouldn't mind a little update. We wanted the place to reflect a next chapter." Marilyn looked around. There was no framed photo of Harold, no keepsake bowls, no books, just ring lights, repositioned furniture, and an air diffuser hissing lavender into the silence she once called sanctuary. Kelsey stood, wineglass in hand. "To growth," she said, raising it like a toast, "and honoring the past by building the future." The guests murmured agreement. Someone clinked a fork against a glass. Marilyn didn't lift her own. She turned and walked out, through the entryway with no rug, past the room that no longer bore Harold's scent, and into the backyard, where his old swing still hung from the sycamore. She sat on the porch step, eyes dry but stinging, fingers gripping the watch in her pocket like a lifeline. She could hear Kelsey inside, talking to someone about a potential sponsorship, something about grief candles and a collaboration. Marilyn closed her eyes. For the first time in 72 years, she felt like a stranger in her own name. Then, faintly, from the other side of the door, "Maybe we'll make the whole place shoppable. Like each room tells a story, a transformation." She opened her eyes. There were no tears. Not yet. But there was resolve. Because something in her had shifted, and it wasn't temporary. The attic door creaked open like it remembered her. Marilyn pulled the chain and climbed carefully, her knees stiff but sure. Dust motes shimmered in the angled sunlight like suspended ash. The insulation smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. No one had been up here in years, not even Harold in his final months. It was their place once, back when storage meant sentiment and not just space. She stepped over boxes labeled Xmas and Greg Baby, careful not to twist her ankle on the uneven floorboards. In the far corner, beneath an old tarp and a rusting floor lamp, she found it. The filing trunk. Black metal, dented on one side. It still had the brass label on top, H&M Owens, Records. Marilyn knelt, heart ticking faster. Inside, manila folders, hand-typed invoices, stamped envelopes, a tangle of yellowed property maps, and old photographs spilled over her lap. One, in particular, stopped her cold. It was the photo from the day the foundation was poured. Harold grinning under a sun hat, her hair tied in a red bandana, both of them covered in cement dust, holding hands like kids at a summer fair. She closed her eyes. Let the memory surface. How they'd laid the first row of bricks together, how Harold insisted they carve their initials into the underside of the porch step, how every corner of this house had once belonged to a decision they made, not a trend they followed. Now her walls were Instagrammable, her life brandable. Her fingers found a sealed envelope tucked into the side divider, handwritten on the front, "Revised Will, 2015, unsigned." Marilyn opened it slowly, scanning the pages. It listed her as sole owner of the home, executor of all assets. The signature line was blank, but the intention wasn't. Downstairs, the faint sound of voices drifted upward. Greg and Kelsey had returned. "Assisted living doesn't mean exile," Kelsey was saying, tone sugary. "It's a lifestyle pivot. I mean, it's not like she's actually using the house," Greg added. "She's here what? 3 days a month?" They laughed. Marilyn closed the trunk. That evening, after they left to grab drinks with friends, Marilyn sat at the kitchen table and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Diane Ramsey," came the voice on the other end, still crisp, still no nonsense. "It's Marilyn Owens," she said. "I found something. I think I need your help." Diane didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in the morning. Bring tea." Marilyn hung up and exhaled through her nose. The kitchen light above her flickered. One of Kelsey's smart bulbs, color shifting softly between blush and ivory. She switched it off manually, preferring the dark. She walked back through the house, bare feet against the tile, seeing it now not as a grieving woman, but as a builder reclaiming a blueprint. The floor plan wasn't just wood and drywall, it was evidence. She stepped onto the porch, watch in one hand, unsigned will in the other. And as the wind picked up across the yard, rustling the sycamore leaves like applause, Marilyn finally smiled. The house wasn't theirs to brand. It was hers to defend. The phone looked like any other landline, matte black, basic buttons, but the base was newer. Marilyn had ordered it online, late at night, after reading 3 articles on elder financial abuse and watching a YouTube video titled "How to Document What They Think You'll Forget." She pressed the record button before slipping the receiver into its cradle. Then she waited. It didn't take long. "Mom," Greg called from the hallway that afternoon, knocking twice before letting himself in. "You got a minute?" Marilyn turned from the sink, towel still in hand. "Of course." He sat at the breakfast bar like he was settling in for something casual, but his leg bounced too fast beneath the stool. "We were thinking," he began, glancing once toward the hallway to check if Kelsey was near, "you might want to visit Dr. Lubbock again, for a little check-in, nothing dramatic." She blinked. "Memory check-in?" He nodded, sheepish. "You've seemed a little scattered lately, nothing serious, just precaution." Marilyn smiled like a sleepy cat. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll go wherever you take me." Greg relaxed, too quickly. After he left, Marilyn turned off the recorder and jotted a date and label on a yellow sticky note. Greg suggested doctor visit, smiling test. The next day, she cleared a kitchen drawer and installed a fireproof lockbox. She placed the unsigned will inside, then a flash drive, then the cassette from her phone's recorder, then a handwritten copy of every financial statement she could download before Greg noticed his access was revoked. At Diane's advice, she bought a second phone. No data plan, just call and record. She wore it in a cardigan pocket during dinners, during helpful chats from Kelsey, during moments when her own silence was expected. And it was working. They were comfortable again. Kelsey even joked over beet risotto about being 2 funerals away from a renovation series. Marilyn laughed. She even poured the wine. That week, Diane returned, papers in one hand, a grocery bag of blueberry muffins in the other. "They tried to file for power of attorney," she said, laying out the documents. "With a physician's note." Marilyn frowned. "What physician?" "Some Dr. Chalmers, out of Taos. I called the clinic. Chalmers retired 4 years ago. And he wasn't a neurologist. He delivered babies." She flipped the letter forward. At the bottom, the signature crooked and oddly thick, like it had been copied twice. "This is forgery," Diane said. Bad forgery, but they assumed you wouldn't check. Marilyn said nothing. She was looking out the window. The sycamore was bare now, branches thin and quiet against the cold. A bird landed on the lowest limb and hopped once, cautious, like it knew the tree might not be safe anymore. They're trying to fade me before I've finished my sentence, she murmured. Diane raised an eyebrow. What was that? Marilyn turned back. Her hands were steady on the table, even as the storm gathered inside her. Let them think I'm soft, she said. Let them think I'm slow. Diane smirked. Because you're about to make them eat that assumption? No, Marilyn said. I'm about to make them wish they'd made a better one. Later that night, Greg emailed her a calendar invite. Subject line, Memory Wellness Clinic, initial consultation. No message, no signature. She clicked accept. Then she went into the attic and pulled out her oldest pair of boots, the ones with cement dust still crusted into the soles, and placed them beside the door. She was done walking quiet. The clinic waiting room smelled like lavender and laminated lies. Marilyn sat perfectly still in the pale blue chair, coat draped over her lap, recorder humming softly in her cardigan pocket. Greg filled out the clipboard like it was a job application, eyes darting between boxes, checking them too fast. I put down the memory complaints, he muttered. Like we discussed. She nodded gently. Good thinking. He smiled, small and relieved, as if her approval was a currency he'd forgotten how to earn. The nurse called her name. 50 minutes later they emerged into the parking lot. The sky had darkened just slightly, thick clouds edging in like a mood shift. Greg looked at her, guilt teetering behind his eyes. She said you're fine, he said, almost like a question. She did, Marilyn replied. I remember. He tried to laugh. It didn't quite land. They drove in silence until the house came into view. As Greg parked, Marilyn turned toward him. Her tone was even, her face unreadable. I know about the forged letter. Greg froze. What? He said too quickly. The one from the retired OBGYN. Diane found it in the legal registry. She called the state licensing board. It's forgery, Greg. He opened his mouth, then shut it. When he spoke, his voice cracked. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Kelsey said it was just temporary, just until we had a better plan, just until things stabilized. She wanted me stable by legal definition, Marilyn said flatly, not in spirit. Greg exhaled, shoulders slumping. I didn't know she submitted it. But you let it stand, she said. You let them question my mind so they could claim my home. Greg looked away. We didn't mean for it to be hostile. You meant for it to be quiet, she corrected. And I wasn't I? Too quiet to stop you. A long silence stretched. Marilyn opened her purse and took out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to him. What's this? He asked, brow furrowing. A balance sheet, she said. Every dollar I paid toward your student loans, your wedding, your first car, the down payment on this very property when you were 32 and unemployed for 6 months. He stared at the paper. I itemized it, she said, with interest. Greg opened his mouth to respond, but she was already walking inside. That evening, Marilyn opened her laptop and began rerouting her financials, bank by bank, account by account. She changed passwords, removed Greg's name from her emergency contacts, reassigned security questions. Then she called the notary. He arrived the next morning with a leather briefcase and the kind of quiet that meant he'd seen families splinter before. Marilyn offered him tea, then opened a folder. I'd like to update my deed and will, she said calmly. He glanced over the paperwork. Your new executor is listed as Diane Ramsey. That's correct. No familial relation? Number just integrity. He nodded. We'll need signatures and one witness. I already asked Lenora from next door, Marilyn replied. She's seen enough to know this isn't drama. It's architecture. The documents were signed by lunch. Marilyn filed the originals into her lockbox, then sat at the kitchen table staring at the pale light through the curtains. There was no music, no speech, Just the tap of her pen against the notepad as she wrote a new line beneath her legal notes. They tried to steal my future by erasing my past. Just then, her phone buzzed. Text from Kelsey. Hey, can we chat later about the house name reveal? We're thinking something soft but soulful, maybe like Owen's Hollow. So rustic, right? LMK. Marilyn stared at the screen. Then she tapped, mark as unread. No reply, no warning, just a quiet, sharpening calm. Because now the paperwork was in place, the locks were changed, the trust was forming, and the next time they walked through her door, they'd be entering a home fortified by something far stronger than drywall. Consequences. The invitations were handwritten, not elegant, just familiar. Lunch on Sunday, light bites, catch up, no drama, promise, love, mom. She left one folded on the corner of Greg's nightstand. Another appeared in Kelsey's favorite motivational journal tucked between the pages of Manifest Your Next Chapter. A third hung on the fridge, magneted beneath a photo Kelsey had staged of herself pretending to stir soup. Sunday came with sun, but the breeze kept the patio cool. Marilyn wore pale lavender, her softest shade, warm, yielding. She set out deviled eggs, cucumber sandwiches, and a lemon tart dusted in powdered sugar. She played Billie Holiday on low. When Kelsey walked in, phone already out for ambiance shots, Marilyn smiled with open hands. I'm so glad you're here, she said, voice mild. It feels good to have family around again. Kelsey tilted her head, surprised but pleased. Of course. It's important to keep connections grounded. Greg followed, mumbling thanks. He hadn't looked her in the eye since the clinic visit. Marilyn guided them to the table. I made all your favorites, she said. Kelsey smirked. From the 90s, maybe. Marilyn laughed, light and distant. Everything comes back around. Even manners. Over sparkling water, they talked about nothing. Real estate trends, beet-based protein shakes, a podcast Kelsey insisted absolutely changed her bound. Rise! Marilyn played along, blinking slowly, refilling glasses. She let her hands tremble just slightly when she served the tart. She asked Greg twice what day of the week it was. She smiled sweetly when she dropped her spoon. Oh, Marilyn, Kelsey said finally, patting her hand. You really shouldn't be managing all this alone? Oh, I don't mind, Marilyn replied. It helps me feel useful, even if I'm not, all there. Kelsey chuckled. Greg shifted uncomfortably. Then came the slip. Well, Kelsey said, slicing into her tart, at this rate, we'll inherit the house before we get the bathroom reno done. Marilyn looked up. Kelsey waved her fork. Joking, you know me. Grief humor. The online crowd loves a wink. Marilyn nodded. Oh, of course, wink away. Her cardigan hid the recorder well. The red light was tiny, the battery strong. She cleared the plates with care, placing each dish in the sink with gentle clinks. Then, while Kelsey was showing Greg her Pinterest board for mid-century morning aesthetics, Marilyn slipped into her office. The door closed with a soft latch. She dialed a number from a yellow notepad marked with stars. Lan? She whispered. A warm voice answered. This is Marilyn Owens. You were recommended by a friend at the co-op. I'd like to discuss listing a property discreetly, not urgent, but eventual. There was a pause. Yes, Marilyn said. Still living there, just planning ahead. She hung up, stepped into the hallway. Greg and Kelsey were still on the couch, laughing over a meme Kelsey had made of a gravestone that read, He died doing what he loved, being an aesthetic. Marilyn walked back in and sat slowly, her knees aching. She looked down at her hands, folded neatly, the same ones that had once helped pour this home's foundation, finger by finger. You know, she said gently, Harold always said the funniest thing. They both looked up. He said, the smallest cuts bleed the longest. Kelsey blinked. Like, paper cuts? Exactly, Marilyn smiled. You don't notice them until it's too late. Greg's brow furrowed, but Marilyn was already rising. Dessert to go? She asked. Kelsey waved a hand. I'm intermittent fasting, but thanks. Marilyn nodded, walking them to the door with practiced grace. Once it shut behind them, she turned the bolt slowly, then the top lock, then the chain. She leaned against it, closed her eyes and whispered, "Cut." Then she went to the recorder, rewound it, and labeled the file. Kelsey, inherit the house comment. On the back, she jotted a single phrase, "Mock grief is still mockery. Document everything." Then her phone lit up again, this time a new number. "Hi, Ms. Owens, it's Leanne. Discretion's my specialty. Let's talk options." Marilyn smiled as she stepped onto the porch. Because the house was no longer a monument, it was becoming her sharpest move. The first thing Marilyn noticed was the noise. It wasn't the usual Sunday calm, no sparrows in the sycamore, no wind over the porch railings. Instead, it was conversation, laughter, the sound of heels on hardwood, a child crying briefly, then quieted by a parent. She turned the corner in her driveway and saw it, a white sandwich board sign staked into her lawn. Open house, modern farmhouse gem, light bites, home tour, and influencer meet and greet. Marilyn slowed the car, pulse steady but rising. Beside her, Diane folded her sunglasses with the same control she used in court. "You were right," she said. "They really thought you wouldn't show." Marilyn put the car in park. Behind them, the sheriff's cruiser pulled up quietly. No lights, no siren, just presence. "Ready?" Diane asked. Marilyn nodded. "Let's remind them who poured the damn footings." Inside, the house was humming. A small crowd milled about the living room. Someone sipped rosé next to the now frameless fireplace. A woman in a peacoat asked aloud if the vibe came with the sale. In the dining room, her grandmother's hutch had been replaced by a ring light and a table of branded candles labeled Grief Glow. At the center of it all stood Kelsey, white jumpsuit, glossy curls, mic'd up. Greg stood behind her, visibly sweating through his shirt. Marilyn stepped over the threshold without announcement. Someone near the door muttered, "Oh, is this staged as part of the tour?" Diane stepped forward. "This isn't staged. This is a legal homeowner entering her house." Greg turned, paling. Kelsey's eyes widened. "Marilyn," she said, forced smiling. "We didn't think you'd be back so early." "I live here," Marilyn replied, "and I don't recall scheduling a circus." Kelsey gestured to the crowd. "We were just showing what's possible, future visioning. This is about transformation." Marilyn raised a hand. "Please direct your attention to Officer Benton." The sheriff stepped forward, holding a thick folder. "We're here to confirm a property ownership dispute. As of this morning, county records officially list Mrs. Owens as sole title holder and legal occupant. There are no shared claims, no pending transfers." He turned to the crowd. "I'm going to ask everyone not listed as a tenant or family guest to leave the premises, now." The murmuring turned awkward. Someone asked for a refund on the candle bundle. Another slipped a deviled egg into her purse and ducked out the back door. Within minutes, the room emptied. Kelsey's cheeks flushed scarlet. "This is ours now," she shrieked. "We've put in so much. We built this story." Marilyn met her eyes, calm as winter glass. "Then you should have written it with a conscience." Greg stepped forward. "Mom, please, we didn't mean—" Diane cut him off. "You committed fraud, Greg. Forgery, unauthorized power of attorney filing, attempted coercion. Shall I keep going?" He looked like a man halfway through drowning. Marilyn turned to Kelsey. "Let me be absolutely clear. This isn't a collaboration. This is a home. You don't get to co-opt it because you installed a diffuser and took pretty pictures." Kelsey's voice cracked. "You can't just kick us out." "Oh, I haven't," Marilyn said, lifting her phone and pressing play. Kelsey's voice echoed through the room. "At this rate, we'll inherit the house before we get the bathroom reno done." The clip ended in silence. Greg sat down. Kelsey stumbled back, breath caught in her throat. Diane leaned in slightly. "Start packing." The sheriff gave them 48 hours. As Marilyn stood alone in the foyer, the door still ajar, she took one last look at the candle table, now half abandoned, labels curling. She reached out, picked one up. Grief Glow, scent, morning citrus. She placed it in the trash. Outside, a crow landed on the mailbox. Inside, Marilyn jotted a note on her kitchen pad. They called it rebranding. I call it trespassing. She capped her pen, then crossed it out and rewrote, Phase 1, complete. The first domino fell at 6:17 a.m. Greg's phone buzzed twice, then fell silent. He rolled over in bed, blinking at the screen. Access denied. Joint account privileges removed. He tried again. Different card, different account, the same red text. Kelsey was still asleep beside him, curled under a blanket with "Breathe and Bloom" embroidered across it. Marilyn had given it to her years ago. She used to call it thoughtful. Now she called it on-brand cozy. Downstairs, the Wi-Fi dropped. A moment later, the electricity flickered. Then it shut off completely. Kelsey groaned. "Babe, did you forget the power bill again?" Greg didn't answer. He was already opening his laptop, frozen at the login screen. Out in the hallway, the thermostat beeped and went dark. By noon, Kelsey's email was buzzing like a hive on fire. "Hi, Kelsey. In light of recent controversies, we're pausing our partnership indefinitely. Our legal team is reviewing statements you made regarding elder care responsibility. This no longer aligns with our brand. Please remove our tags from all active content within 48 hours. She was pacing barefoot in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice rising with every sentence. No, I don't mock grief. I monetize recovery. It's aspirational. There's a difference." Greg sat at the counter with his head in his hands, surrounded by candles they could no longer sell. "I think," he said quietly, "we're screwed." "No," Kelsey snapped. "We are pivoting." That was when the video dropped. Someone posted it anonymously to a Facebook group titled "Inheritance Isn't a Right," then to a private Reddit thread called "Quiet Retaliations." Then it hit Twitter. A clip, just 26 seconds long. Kelsey slicing lemon tart, laughing, her voice ringing clear. "Well, at this rate, we'll inherit the house before we get the bathroom reno done." Cut to Marilyn, smiling, pouring wine, silent. The caption read, "This is what elder gaslighting sounds like," with a smile. By 3 p.m., the video had 27,000 views. By 5 p.m., Chandra Grief Glow was trending, for all the wrong reasons. By 8 p.m., Kelsey's brand sponsor list had been cut in half. Marilyn didn't post it herself. She just watched from her sunroom, tea steeping, the recorder still warm in her lap like a loyal dog. She wore Harold's cardigan that evening, buttoned to the top. From the porch, Diane texted, "That clip hit. You've got allies now, strangers calling you a silent icon." Marilyn smiled. Not so silent anymore. She went into her files, double-checked the banking transfers. Every dollar Greg once had access to now sat elsewhere, untouchable, neatly folded into the charitable trust she was building one receipt at a time. Then she opened the file marked Utilities, Owens Household, and clicked Cancel Autopay. The water, the power, the internet, all in Kelsey's name, all gone. That night, Kelsey cried in the upstairs bathroom. Greg didn't comfort her. He was scrolling through forums, looking for anything that said how to undo power of attorney fraud without jail time. Marilyn sat on her porch swing with a throw, blanket over her knees. Above her, the wind moved the chimes gently. She looked out across her yard, lit faintly by the solar lanterns she'd installed before the funeral, and she whispered, just once, "Delete me again. See what happens." The next morning, Kelsey opened Instagram to post a new reel titled Grief Glow, The Real Story. But when she tapped upload, a pop-up appeared. "This audio has been flagged for abusive content. Account under review." She stared at the screen, then she screamed. Across town, Marilyn opened her door to a small manila envelope. Inside, a printed note from a former sponsor. "We regret our previous association with Ms. Kelsey Owens. If you're ever open to consulting on elder protection advocacy, we'd love to talk." No logo. Just a name. Shepard and Dale, LLP, Reputation Management Division. Marilyn folded the note slowly, slid it into her folder, then capped her pen and wrote beneath it, "The internet never forgets. Neither do I." The knock came at dusk, not loud, not urgent, just hesitant. Marilyn glanced up from her ledger, a pen still resting between her fingers. Outside, the sky was bruising purple, the sycamore casting long shadows across the porch. She opened the door slowly. Greg stood there, alone. His shirt was wrinkled, no jacket. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, and for once, he didn't look like a man ready to defend a bad decision. "Can I sit?" he asked. Marilyn stepped aside. "You know the chair." He walked in like the house might flinch. Sat in the old rocker by the fireplace, Harold's chair. Then folded his hands between his knees like he was waiting for a sentence. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry," he started. She raised a brow. "For which part?" He looked down. "For all of it. For letting it go this far. For letting her speak for me. For not protecting you when I should have." Marilyn didn't answer. She walked to the side table and picked up a tan folder. "You know," she said softly, "when you were 6, you wanted a red bike. Your father thought you should wait until Christmas. I sold a bracelet my grandmother gave me and bought it for your birthday instead." Greg blinked. She handed him the folder. "That bike's in here. So is your prom tux rental. Your first year at NYU. Your first root canal. The gas card I co-signed when your license was still warm. The down payment on the Seattle condo you and Kelsey said you'd pay back in installments." He opened the folder. Pages, dozens of them. Dates, amounts, check numbers, receipts. At the bottom of each page, in clean, small handwriting, adjusted for inflation. Interest calculated quarterly. Greg's mouth parted. "You kept track?" "I was always told motherhood meant sacrifice," she said. "So I never asked for a thing. But you asked for everything. You just didn't call it that. I didn't know." "No," she cut in gently. "You didn't care to know." Greg looked up. His voice cracked. "I got lost, Mom. I thought if I gave her what she wanted, she'd stay. I didn't want to lose everything." Marilyn tilted her head. "You lost me anyway." He inhaled, hard. "What do I have to do to fix this?" She didn't answer right away. She sat beside the fireplace, folding her hands like she used to when telling him bedtime stories. "You can start," she said, "by reading the envelope I left for you on the counter." Greg turned. A manila envelope sat beside a ceramic bowl filled with peppermints. He picked it up, peeled it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper, a legal disclaimer from Diane's office, stating that Marilyn had formally removed Greg Owens from her medical proxy, her power of attorney, and all financial authorizations as of 30 days prior. He swallowed hard. "You already filed this." She nodded. "Weeks ago. I thought you were just mad," he whispered. "No," she said, standing. "I was finally awake." He stared at the paper. She walked to the front door and opened it. The porch light flicked on automatically. A moth danced near the bulb. Greg stood but didn't move. "Mom, please, I need time." Marilyn looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, he seemed small, not cruel, not cunning, just unfinished. "You've had a lifetime of it," she said. He stepped past her onto the porch. Before he descended the stairs, he turned. "Will you tell her I came?" "Kelsey?" she asked. He nodded. She smiled. "I think she'll know." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Marilyn walked back inside and took her pen from the table. On the folder, she added one last note in the corner. "Forgiveness is not the same as restoration." Then she underlined it, twice. The courthouse elevator smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Marilyn wrote it in silence, a leather folder clutched tight against her chest. Diane stood beside her in black slacks and courtroom flats, scanning her notes one last time. "You're sure about this?" she asked quietly. "I've never been surer of anything," Marilyn replied. "And I've given birth." They reached the 4th floor. Legal Services Division. A hallway of bland linoleum and beige waiting chairs. But Marilyn walked through it like a cathedral, every step firm, deliberate. Inside the glass-walled office, a young notary glanced up. "Mrs. Owens?" Marilyn smiled softly. "Let's get started." By noon, the trust was finalized. The Harold and Marilyn Owens Charitable Trust, legal title holder of the property at 148 Sycamore Lane, irrevocable. Tax exempt. Designated use: transitional housing for single women over 60, exiting financial abuse. Marilyn signed the deed with a blue ink pen and steady fingers, then the amended will, then the executor declaration. She didn't flinch once. Diane handed over the last page. And this appoints her. Marilyn looked down at the name, Lena Holloway, her niece, Harold's sister's daughter. Quiet, kind, the only one who had shown up every other Thursday with soup and silence in the weeks after the funeral, never posting, never probing. Lena will keep this place standing, Marilyn said, not branded, not brokered, just lived in. The notary stamped the final page with a heavy, deliberate thud. Done. Marilyn exhaled. Good. That house has outlived its usefulness as a trophy. Later that afternoon, she walked into the bank where Greg once held co-signing authority. The manager recognized her instantly. "Mrs. Owens, can I help with something?" "Yes," she said, pulling out her documents. "I'm here to freeze all shared lines. Effective immediately. New beneficiaries, new security credentials. I've brought notarized proof." He scanned the paperwork. His expression shifted to one of respect. "We'll begin now." Outside, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Kelsey. "So glad Greg finally came by last night. He's starting to get it. Hope we can all move forward." Marilyn didn't respond. She opened her notes app and typed, "They think closure is an apology. I think it's a lock." That evening she made 2 phone calls. The first was to Lena. "You're executor now," she said. "You don't need to do anything right away. Just know it's real." Lena's voice cracked on the other end. "Aunt Marilyn, I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep the hydrangeas alive, and don't ever let anyone stage a grief shoot on that porch. I promise." The second call was to the transitional housing director she'd met through Diane's law network. They'd only spoken twice before. "It's official," Marilyn said. "Let's begin vetting applicants." From the back bedroom, she heard the wind lift one of the empty picture frames Kelsey had left on the wall, the kind with no real photo, just a placeholder family laughing stock image smiles. It fell with a satisfying crack. Marilyn didn't move to pick it up. Instead, she made tea. As she poured, her phone buzzed again, this time from Greg. "Mom, please tell me you didn't give the house away." She didn't answer. Instead, she forwarded the text to Diane with a subject line, "Attempted guilt trip, time stamped." Then she turned off her phone. She sat at the table in the quiet, staring out the window toward the garden where Harold once planted tomatoes in crooked rows. She pulled the trust folder close and tapped a single word on the cover with her fingernail. Sanctuary. Outside, a neighbor's porch light flicked on. Inside, her heart did too. But before she stood to clean up, she slid a small envelope into the front pocket of the folder. It held one thing, a handwritten note from Harold, decades old. "Build it strong, build it yours." She looked toward the hallway, where framed family photos used to hang, and thought, that chapter's over. But she wasn't done writing. The moving truck rumbled up Sycamore Lane at 8:03 a.m. It was matte gray, the kind used for estate clearouts or fast flips. No logo, just function. Marilyn watched from her porch, mug in hand, feet wrapped in wool socks Harold once teased her for wearing year-round. Her hydrangeas were beginning to bud. She took a long sip of chamomile and didn't blink as the truck came to a stop in front of her driveway. Greg stepped out of the cab first. No jacket, no tie. Just the same threadbare hoodie he wore in college, back when he still asked for advice instead of permission. Behind him, Kelsey climbed out, face hidden under oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat that made her look more like someone attending Coachella than evacuating the scene of her own unraveling. She didn't acknowledge Marilyn, but she did start shouting orders. "Be careful with that ring light, it's vintage!" she barked at the movers. "And the diffuser set goes in its own box. Separate. Please don't mix it with linens." A couple neighbors had already emerged. Mrs. Greeley across the street with her robe and morning paper, the Buckners pretending to garden while shamelessly eavesdropping from their porch. Marilyn didn't wave. Greg approached slowly, his hands in his pockets, eyes darting between the porch and the ground. "Mom," he started, voice low. "Please?" She said nothing. Can we talk one last time, off the record?" Still nothing. He swallowed. You don't have to do this. Kelsey, she's just upset. We're under a lot of pressure. From the truck, Kelsey screeched, I'm not moving a single piece of branded glassware without proper liability insurance, Greg. Marilyn raised her mug to her lips. Greg reached the porch steps, voice cracking. You really gave it away? Marilyn finally looked at him. No, she said quietly. I gave it purpose. He shook his head like he was trying to dislodge something painful. You're tearing the family apart. Marilyn tilted her head. Then perhaps it wasn't built well. Behind him, Kelsey emerged again, red-faced and breathless. You smug little witch, she shouted. You'll die in that dusty chair with no one left to clap for you. Marilyn stood. She walked down the porch stairs, each step slow and deliberate, until she stood just a breath away from Kelsey. I've had applause, she said, her voice even. It never fixed a broken roof or a broken child. Kelsey's mouth twisted. You're a bitter old woman. Marilyn's hands stayed clasped. And you're leaving. The sheriff's deputy pulled up at the curb, same one from the open house. He didn't get out, just tipped his hat from behind the windshield and waited. A mover shuffled awkwardly past with a box labeled GLAMROOM. Fragile. Kelsey turned to Greg. You're just going to let this happen? You're really just going to let her humiliate us in front of the whole street? Greg didn't answer. Marilyn stepped back toward the porch. I'll send your things to the forwarding address on file, she called. Anything left behind after today is considered donation. Kelsey's voice broke. You can't erase us. No, Marilyn said, taking one last sip of her tea. You did that yourselves. Greg didn't follow Kelsey when she stormed inside. He sat on the porch step like he had when he was 10, after breaking a neighbor's window and blaming the dog. You think this is the end? He said. Marilyn looked down at him. Number. This is the part where you start over. A crash echoed from inside, something glass, something expensive. Greg didn't flinch. Marilyn went back up the porch. Before she turned the knob, she glanced once at the deputy and nodded. He exited the car slowly, clipboard in hand. Inside, the wind had knocked a curtain loose. It fluttered against the frame like a ribbon at a finish line. She tucked it back into place. Outside, Kelsey's scream split the morning air. But Marilyn, already moving toward the kitchen, didn't look back. She had another envelope to prepare. The attic air was warmer than usual. Marilyn sat cross-legged on the old quilt she'd rescued from the linen chest before Kelsey could call it shabby chic. Dust floated lazily through sunbeams cutting in from the circular window. A small, oscillating fan buzzed nearby. She'd brought it up for Harold one summer when he insisted on finding the good Christmas lights by himself. Now, the space smelled like cedar, cardboard, and the faint memory of cinnamon. Marilyn unlatched the photo box. Inside were fragments, yellowed programs, postcards from Oregon, Polaroids with edges curling inward like they were trying to protect themselves. She sifted carefully, then stopped at one in particular. Greg, age 5. Gap-toothed, ketchup-stained, arms slung around Harold's neck in a hug so fierce it looked like it might tip them both over. The photo was sun-washed, almost too bright, but their smiles were undeniable. Marilyn was in the background, blurry but laughing. She traced her thumb over the image. He used to ask to sleep with the light on, not because he was afraid, but because he liked to see dreams land. He used to cry when she clipped his fingernails too short. He used to call dandelions wish weeds. She closed her eyes. Had she missed something? Some sign? Some moment where the kindness started to curdle? Was it a slow corrosion or a pivot too sharp to track? Marilyn opened her eyes again. Not misty, just tired. She reached into the box and pulled out the camcorder. Not the new one. The old one Harold had used to film Greg's science fair project, his awkward middle school dance moves, his senior breakfast speech. She set it up on the floor, pointed at the rocking chair. She pressed record. Her voice was quiet at first. If you're watching this, I'm gone. A pause. Not physically. I'm still here. Probably with a garden full of weeds and a fridge full of leftovers. But emotionally, legally, spiritually, I'm gone from wherever you thought I existed only for your convenience. She shifted in the chair. You weren't always like this, Greg. You were soft. You made cards out of cereal boxes and cried when a neighbor's cat died. You had tenderness. Another pause. Her jaw worked slowly, like she was holding back something heavier than anger. I don't know when Kelsey replaced your compass with her own. I don't know when ambition became entitlement, but I do know you let it happen. You watched her diminish me in my own home and called it a phase. You forged my future with disappearing ink. She leaned forward slightly. I still love you. That's the tragedy, I suppose. But I don't owe you sanctuary. I owe myself truth. Marilyn clicked the camera off. She pulled out a padded mailer and slipped the photograph inside, added a small note on monogrammed stationery. You can keep this. The house won't miss you. She sealed it, addressed it, walked it to the mailbox. Back inside, the late light was pouring into the kitchen like honey. She made herself a soft cheese sandwich and ate it slowly, savoring the quiet. Across the table sat the camcorder, still warm, the tiny red light now dark. That night, she filed the video into a folder marked, "If They Try Again." Then she opened a second one, "If I Ever Forget." Just before bed, she walked down the hallway and past the empty picture hooks where family photos had once hung. She didn't fill them. Instead, she opened her drawer and pulled out the watch. Harold's. Still ticking. Still hers. As she slipped it on, she glanced toward the doorway and whispered, "Goodbye, baby." Not loud, but meant. The courtroom wasn't grand. It was one of those modern county courtrooms built for speed, not spectacle. Gray carpet, modular furniture, and that particular fluorescent buzz that made everyone look just a little bit guilty. But Marilyn entered with her head high and her hair done in a quiet updo. She wore navy, no black. She had mourned enough. Greg and Kelsey sat at the petitioner's table. Kelsey in beige, like someone auditioning for sincerity. Greg with a wrinkled folder and eyes that avoided everyone. Diane sat beside Marilyn, calm and precise, her briefcase already open, a tabbed binder in front of her like scripture. "All rise," the bailiff called. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with sharp cheekbones and the patience of a librarian, entered. Case number 4792, Owens v. Owens. Motion to declare Ms. Marilyn Owens mentally unfit and to challenge the transfer of property into an irrevocable charitable trust. The room settled. Kelsey's lawyer, young and eager, stood first. "Your Honor, we are here today because my clients, Mr. and Mrs. Owens, are deeply concerned about the mental well-being of Mr. Owens's elderly mother. They believe her recent legal decisions were not made with full capacity or clarity, and that undue influence or confusion may have affected the creation of this so-called trust." Marilyn didn't flinch. Diane stood. "Your Honor, we'll provide medical clearance from a licensed neuropsychologist dated within the past 30 days, stating Ms. Owens is in full cognitive health. We'll also submit financial ledgers spanning 20 years, her recent banking transfers, all executed independently, and a video statement made with time-stamped validation. And finally," she placed a flash drive on the table, a 27-second clip in which the petitioners openly joke about inheriting her home before they finish a bathroom renovation. Kelsey's lawyer objected. The judge waved it off. "I'll allow it, for tone, if nothing else." The flash drive played on the overhead screen. Laughter, lemon tart. Kelsey's voice, "At this rate, we'll inherit the house before we get the bathroom reno done." Then Marilyn, in the background. Silent, pouring wine, watching. The silence in the courtroom after the video cut was louder than the laughter had been. Greg sank deeper into his chair. Kelsey crossed her arms, eyes glinting with resentment. "Do you deny making that comment?" the judge asked. Kelsey straightened. "It was a joke. Context matters." Marilyn rose slowly. "May I speak?" The judge nodded. Marilyn walked forward. No notes, no papers, just her voice. "I was quiet for too long," she began. "I believed that being soft meant being good, that if I smiled through discomfort, they'd eventually see me." She turned slightly toward Greg. "I didn't raise you to lie. I raised you to think. But somewhere along the line, you let someone else think for you." Greg stared at the floor. To be clear, I'm not confused. I'm not frail. I am, finally, resolute. She took a slow breath. Being quiet got me hurt. Speaking up got me free. The judge leaned back. Thank you, Ms. Owens. I've heard enough. She shuffled some papers. This court finds no evidence of mental incompetence or coercion. All documents appear valid and executed properly. The trust will remain as filed. Greg closed his eyes. Kelsey stood too fast, knocking over her chair. This isn't justice. It's elder manipulation in reverse. She's making a mockery of us. No, the judge replied calmly. She's just no longer afraid of you. Court adjourned. Outside, cameras waited. Not many, just a local station and a reporter from an elder rights blog. They asked Marilyn for a comment. She smiled politely. No, thank you. But once she reached Diane's car, she paused. Actually, she said, turning back to the reporter, just one thing. The camera focused. People think legacy is what you leave. I think it's what you protect while you're still breathing. She stepped into the car, shut the door. Back on Sycamore Lane, a package waited on her porch. No return address. Inside, a single small jar. One of Kelsey's candles. Label peeled off. Wick unused. Attached was a note, written in Greg's handwriting. I don't want this either. I just didn't know how to stop her. Marilyn lit the candle, let it burn for 30 seconds, then gently extinguished the flame. The courtroom was smaller this time. No cameras, no reporters, just 4 rows of pew benches and the thump of a ceiling fan that refused to settle into rhythm. Marilyn sat alone at the respondent's table, her hands folded neatly over a brown leather handbag. She wore dark green today, the same shade Harold used to call her storm color. Diane was beside her, flipping slowly through case documents, her pen already uncapped. Across the aisle, Greg sat in a suit that didn't quite fit. No Kelsey, not this time. She was home, or hiding, or somewhere rebranding her grief as a wellness journey. Marilyn didn't ask. Court is now in session, the clerk called. State of New Mexico versus Gregory Owens, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult? Greg flinched at the wording. The judge, different from last time, adjusted his glasses and looked over the file. Mr. Owens, you've waived the right to a jury trial, correct? Greg nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Marilyn didn't look at him. She didn't need to anymore. The prosecution laid it out clinically. Power of attorney filed without proper consent, a forged letter from a non-practicing physician, banking withdrawals unaccounted for, a home nearly stripped of ownership through manipulation and gaslighting, all under the pretense of protecting an aging parent. Then Diane stood. We're not here to humiliate, she said. We're here to clarify. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a bad idea that went too far. This was methodical. This was calculated, and it only stopped when my client refused to stay quiet. She submitted final documentation, account statements, expert testimony, and a signed affidavit from the neurologist who cleared Marilyn, twice. The judge asked, "Does the respondent wish to make a statement?" Marilyn stood slowly. Only this. She looked at Greg, eyes calm but carved from granite. You were given everything, from braces to bailouts, from birthdays to breakdowns. And when it came time to give back, when all I asked for was honesty, you gave me strategy. She didn't wait for permission. She sat down again, dignity intact. The courtroom fell quiet as the judge flipped through the file. Then, this court finds Mr. Gregory Owens guilty of financial exploitation under New Mexico Statute 3047-1. The court further rules that all restitution, including fraudulent withdrawals and asset interference, be repaid to Ms. Marilyn Owens in full. Greg sagged in his chair. The judge continued, voice measured. In addition, Kelsey Owens is hereby barred from all legal or financial interest in the Owens estate, now and in perpetuity. Marilyn exhaled, just once. And finally, the judge concluded, this court recognizes the integrity and legal soundness of the Harold and Marilyn Owens Charitable Trust. Its terms shall remain sealed and irrevocable. No further challenges will be entertained. Gavel. Done. Diane didn't smile. She didn't have to. Greg stood shakily as the bailiff approached. "I'll turn myself in tomorrow," he whispered. "I need time." The judge glanced down. "You had time. You used it poorly." The bailiff gestured. Greg followed. No cuffs. Not yet. But every step sounded like regret. Marilyn gathered her things without a word. Diane touched her shoulder once, light as a falling leaf. Outside the air was brisk. It smelled like juniper and verdict. On the courthouse steps, a woman in a navy coat was waiting. Lena. "Aunt Marilyn," she said softly. Marilyn embraced her. "Thank you for coming." "I cleared the back room," Lena said. "The first applicant moves in tomorrow. She used to be a teacher. Lost her home after her son took out loans in her name." Marilyn nodded. "She'll be safe here." They walked together toward the parking lot. At the curb, Marilyn paused and looked back at the courthouse. "For years I thought silence was love," she said. "Turns out love has a louder voice." Lena smiled gently. "And a sharper pen." Marilyn slipped into the passenger seat. As Lena pulled away from the curb, Marilyn's phone buzzed once in her handbag. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. Back home, the porch light was already on. Automatic now, triggered by movement or the fall of dusk. As they approached the house, Marilyn noticed something new tucked into the mailbox. No envelope, just a single photo. Greg, 6 years old, holding a dandelion in one hand. On the back, in blocky pen, "I'm sorry, I miss the wishweed days." She stared at it, then turned it over. On her porch, she stood perfectly still and whispered, "But you blew too hard." The lake didn't speak much. It didn't need to. It shimmered like brushed steel in the morning sun, its surface rippling only when the ducks glided through or when the wind curled its fingers along the shoreline. Marilyn stood on the deck of her small retirement cottage, wrapped in a sky-blue cardigan and holding a mug that said, "Trust no one who says, 'Just trust me.'" Lena had given it to her, laughing, on her first morning there. It had become a ritual, coffee on the deck, watching the world arrive slowly. The cottage was modest but full of light. 1 bedroom, a little studio off the back for painting, a kitchen that smelled like rosemary and lemon oil. The walls were lined with artwork. Some were prints, some were hers. Most were unfinished. That was the point. The community here was small and real. No one asked how big your house used to be or if you had kids who called. They talked about books, soup recipes, and the migratory patterns of the blue herons that passed overhead in October. Marilyn taught a watercolor class on Thursdays, not because she was an expert, but because she was curious. She liked the way the color bled into wet paper, never quite following instructions, always blooming where it wanted. She liked that no one tried to own it. Lena visited every Saturday. They didn't call it caretaking. They called it brunch. Lena brought lavender scones and peeled oranges into quarters just the way Marilyn liked. They played cards sometimes, or talked about the women living in the trust house back on Sycamore Lane, how the second applicant had arrived with nothing but a duffel bag and a folder of eviction notices. "She framed her GED last week," Lena had said once, "told me no one ever clapped when she passed anything." So we clapped. Marilyn had smiled, eyes damp but clear. "Then you did something sacred." The old pain didn't echo as often. When it did, it was quieter, like the distant hum of a power line after rain. That afternoon, she opened the cedar box beneath her bed. Inside, only one thing. Greg's photo, the one with the dandelion. Folded note still tucked in back. She took it out slowly, walked outside. The sky was beginning to pinken at the edges, the lake softening to pearl. She crouched by the fire pit and struck a match. The flame caught instantly, curling the paper like it had been waiting. She watched the letter burn until it was nothing but charcoal and guilt. Then she stood. She didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it didn't own her. That night, as the porch light clicked on beside her, Marilyn curled into her reading chair and opened her favorite novel, not for the plot, but because the spine felt good in her hands. Outside, the frogs began their low chorus. Inside, her phone buzzed. Lena again. New applicant approved. Widow, 64. Kelsey's old age, if she's lucky. Funny how life evens out. Marilyn texted back a heart emoji and set the phone down. Then she lit a candle. Not one from Kelsey's line. Just vanilla bean. Cheap. Simple. Real. She stared at the flame for a long time, letting the silence settle over her shoulders like a blanket. Then she whispered, just loud enough to hear herself say it. Silence was their weapon. But peace was mine.